Hello, everyone. This is Sean Lassiter, and I will be taking you through sex and sexism this week. So let's get started. The first is just a cartoon. It reminded me of how I felt many times being the only woman in a male dominated profession, where you give a suggestion or you talk about something, but it's not really heard until a man says it. So I thought it was a simplified way to sum up those feelings throughout my life. So I want to just start with some basic definitions. Sexism, defined in our textbook, is the use of structural, institutional, and cultural power by cisgender men, and to a lesser degree, trans men, to deny resources to and extract resources from cisgender women and transgender women for the sole benefit of men as a group. I also like the second definition that I found. It's a little bit shorter, but it's a tongue twister. It says sexism is a patriarchal and systemic institutional, social, political, and economic oppression of those identified. I like this one because it's a little bit more broader. It kind of talks more about if men found themselves in the minority of a situation that they can be included in this term and definition around sexism. There's some other key terms that I felt like extended the word sexism. So you have internalized sexism. This is when girls and women internalize the lies and stereotypes and myths that they've also heard on replay in our society, the same ones that boys and men have heard, but women have the ability to internalize those lies and stereotypes as well and oppress others based on those. Also, racialized sexism. This is when women of color aren't targeted just because of their gender or just because of their race, but it's both at the same time. And so this reminded me of our definition from last week, the intersectionality definition. It's where race and gender intersect. And so I thought that was a critical key term to put in place. Related key terms: misogyny, patriarchy, and feminism. So misogyny and patriarchy, it's real simple, but I think I've conflated those in the past, and I think I'll use those more appropriately now that I know that misogyny is really the hatred of women in the feminine form, when patriarchy is the system of power controlled by men. And then feminist is the theory that political, economic, and social equality of the sexes can exist, and we can fight for that. So, just a brief historical view. It throughout history, throughout our time, society, throughout civilizations, there has been some sort of sexism visible in societies, whether they viewed women to be of a lower status than men, or those double standards, or just the fact that almost all images of God are male. And then just gender roles typically show up throughout society and throughout our history. Sexism can really be divided into three categories, if you will. They show up on an individual level. That's that stereotypes of attitudes and behaviors that include gender roles, assumptions about occupation, lifestyle, what is appropriate and inappropriate for men and women. And then on that professional level, what does it mean to have sexism at work, right? So how does that show up in gender pay and double standards and sexual harassment and then career advancements? And then all the way to that institutional level. And that refers to the manipulation and toleration of institutional politics that restrict the opportunities of one sex compared to another. So we'll go a little bit deeper into those three. So we'll talk about that everyday sexism, that individual sexism, and those gender stereotypes, personality traits, where women are supposed to be nurturing, more emotional, accommodating, whereas men can be self-confident, aggressive, and assertive. Then you get to those domestic behaviors where I heard all my life around women should cook and clean and take care of the children, where men get to really just take care of the finances, work on cars, do home repairs, those type of things. And then occupations that women should aspire to do, like teacher and nurses, whereas men can aspire to be pilots, doctors, engineers. And then the last one is that physical appearance, really just that weight that women feel around having to be thin and graceful and well groomed, whereas men can kind of have a little bit more flexibility and leeway in how they show up in professional and personal spaces. But then we can kind of drift from just that everyday microaggression to really violence and sexism. And so they took a survey, and 1.5 million women said that they had either been raped or physically assaulted throughout their lifetime. So it's 25% of the woman population saying that they have been either raped or physically assaulted. And I just wanted to note that in 1997, Bill Clinton did pass or sign the Violence Against Women's Act. And it did put some provisions and protections for women. But I like to say, we have a really long way to go in that area. So about work and sexism, we talk a lot about the gender pay. And so this graph right here just really shows that women as a whole, right, are underpaid. But overall, Black and Hispanic women are grossly underpaid and face the biggest pay gaps compared to white men. And then just kind of digging a little bit deeper into sexual harassment and assault at work. So they did a survey of people, and women in every category, females oftentimes, said that they had experienced some type of sexual harassment or sexual assault. And then you can see it kind of broken down in different categories, but women at a high level over men said that they had experienced sexual harassment and assault at the workplace. I also wanted to honor my colleagues and my classmates, and I know that you are working on different things for your major, so I wanted to do a little bit of sexism in sports and media. I don't have a lot of time, so I embedded a lot of the material and the resources into my slides, but I love the first one around like advertisement and how female athletes usually are portrayed sexier and objectified on the cover of magazines than their male counterparts. And so you can see that as a pattern throughout advertisement. And then I try to do a little bit on social work, but I just thought really like just as a whole how sexism is really socially constructed, and how does the social work profession really deal with that. But when I dug a little deeper, I did find that, of course, men in social work can earn more money than females in social work. But then you see males holding higher administration positions in social work, even though it's a female-dominated profession. I want to talk about institutional sexism. This just whole notion of legislating women, whether that's on a collegiate level, where we found that, where researchers found that women were asked higher requirements to get into certain degree programs than men were, or if it's on a state and federal level around reproductive justice and rights, birth control, legislating birth control on every level, or just dress codes. The dress codes we find in grade school and K through 12 all the way up through our career seem to be targeted towards women and girls in the way we dress. And then the fourth one, just family leave policies because the federal government has not stepped in to really set a standard for that. CEOs and leaders of companies can determine what they want that to be. And oftentimes it is not favorable to women and what they need in order to take care of their children. I just want to talk about the feminist movement and how it was waves of advocacy. The first wave was around the 19th and 20th century. This was during the women's suffrage, voters' right, but this really was about white women being able to vote. But during this time, they also fought for the right to educate. Education was a male-dominated profession, and so it started to shift during this time. Marriage and property laws, and then also reproductive rights. In the second wave in the 1960s, this is when a lot more of the civil rights movement started to happen, and some laws happened that would allow Black women to then vote. But they also focused on sexism and patriarchy, gender-based violence, inequality in the workplace, birth control, sexual liberation. The transgender movement started to really pick up during this time, And then the third wave was 1990s to 2000 and really current. This is when it started having a deeper conversation around intersectionalities between race and gender, and the Me Too movement that was started by a Black woman. And then diversity in women, stereotypes in sexual identities just being broadening, and us putting the umbrella of the term women a little bit more bigger so that we can include more people under that umbrella. So that's it. Most of my references are embedded right into the PowerPoint. But if you would like those spelled out, just let me know. So have a good week, and thank you for your time.